My name is Julia, and before I tell you anything else, let me tell you about a sound. A sound so simple yet so heavy that it still follows me everywhere. The sound of a bag hitting the floor. It wasn't loud. It didn't crash or explode, it was just a dull thud. But that sound ended my childhood. That night my father stood near the front door of our apartment. The lights were on, but the room felt dark. His face didn't show anger, and that scared me more than shouting ever could. He looked tired, like someone who had already made up his mind long before speaking. He dropped the bag at my feet and said calmly, almost casually, "Julia, you're 18 now. I've done what I could. From here on, you're on your own." I waited. I honestly waited for him to say something else. Maybe a pause, maybe regret, maybe this is temporary. But instead, he opened the door, pressed my backpack into my hands, and stepped back. No hug, no explanation, no goodbye. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the wall, trying to understand how a single door could separate my entire life into two parts. Just minutes ago, I had a room, a bed, a place to belong. Now I had a bag of clothes, a phone about to die, and $30 in my wallet. I thought about knocking. I imagined myself apologizing, even though I didn't know what for. I imagined promising to be better, quieter, easier to live with. But I also imagined the look on his face. That look that always made me feel like a burden instead of a daughter. And something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make me turn around. So I walked away. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept moving, step after step, until the building disappeared behind me. My legs eventually led me to a bus stop a few blocks away. I sat down on the cold metal bench and hugged my backpack tight, like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. Cars rushed past, their headlights flashing across my face and vanishing just as quickly. People were inside them, warm, busy, heading somewhere that mattered. I felt invisible, like the world had decided I no longer counted. My phone vibrated in my hand. My father's name lit up the screen, glowing in the dark. One call, just one call, and I could go back to the apartment. Back to pretending everything was fine. I stared at the screen for a long time, then turned the phone off. In a shaky whisper, barely louder than the traffic, I said, "If you want me to survive alone, I will." That night, sleep came in short, broken pieces. Every sound made my heart race. Every shadow felt like a threat. By the time the sky started to change color, my back hurt, my eyes burned, and my chest felt heavy with everything I hadn't cried out yet. I walked into a convenience store that never closed and splashed water on my face in the tiny bathroom sink. I avoided the mirror. I didn't want to see what I had become overnight. I bought the cheapest breakfast and the smallest coffee they had. When the cashier handed me the receipt, I stared at it like it was a warning. A reminder that my money, my time, and my chances were disappearing fast. That day, I walked the city asking the same question again and again. Are you hiring? Cafes, small shops, places I had passed my whole life without noticing. Some people smiled politely and said no. Some didn't even look up. Most told me to apply online as if I had a home computer waiting for me somewhere. By late afternoon, exhaustion settled into my bones. My feet hurt. My stomach twisted with hunger. I wandered without direction until I saw a piece of paper taped to a door. It said, "Free meals today." I told myself I was just hungry, but deep down I think I needed something else. Inside, the air smelled like soup and old furniture. People sat quietly, pretending not to notice who belonged there and who didn't. A woman with tired eyes and a clipboard sat across from me and asked my name. Her voice was gentle. Not curious, not judging. When she asked where I was staying that night, I looked down at my hands and said the truth. "I don't have a place." She didn't gasp, she didn't pity me. She just nodded like she had heard those words many times before. That night, I slept in a youth shelter across town. The mattress was thin. The room was shared. The walls were worn down by other stories just like mine. But the door locked. No one could throw me out. Lying there in the dark, listening to strangers breathe, I realized something terrifying and powerful at the same time. I was completely on my own now. Whatever happened next wouldn't be because of my father's decisions. It would be because of mine. And without knowing it yet, that night was the very first page of a life I was about to build from absolutely nothing. The shelter had a rhythm of its own. You learned it quickly because if you didn't, it swallowed you whole. Lights out at a fixed hour. Wake-up calls that didn't care how late you cried yourself to sleep. Shared bathrooms where everyone avoided eye contact, as if looking too closely might make someone else's pain stick to you. That first morning, I woke up before the alarm, my body tense like it was waiting to be kicked out again. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then the unfamiliar ceiling, the muffled sounds of movement, and the smell of instant coffee pulled me back. I was still here, still not home, still alone. I sat up slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast, this fragile sense of safety would disappear. Around me, other girls were getting ready for their day, tying their hair, pulling on worn shoes, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned not to waste energy. I followed them into the small common area and poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted more like warm water. I drank it anyway. Hunger makes you less picky. As I stood there, clutching the cup for warmth, a strange thought crossed my mind. No one here knew me, not as a problem, not as a disappointment, just as Julia. And for the first time since my father shut that door, that felt like relief. That day became a blur of walking, asking, waiting, and being turned away. I filled out applications on borrowed computers, typing carefully, afraid of making mistakes that would cost me chances I couldn't afford to lose. I smiled at people who didn't smile back. I nodded when they said, "We'll call you," even though something in their tone told me they wouldn't. By the time I returned to the shelter in the evening, my feet were blistered and my head ached from holding everything together. Nights were the hardest. During the day, survival kept my mind busy. At night, there was nothing to distract me from the questions. Why was I so easy to let go of? Had I really been that heavy to carry? I stared at the ceiling, replaying moments from my childhood, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong. Every unanswered question pressed down on my chest until breathing felt like work. A few days later, the woman with the clipboard found me sitting alone at one of the tables. Her name was Sarah. She slid into the chair across from me and asked how the job search was going. I wanted to lie and say fine, but the truth spilled out instead. I told her I was scared, that I didn't know how long I could keep doing this. She listened without interrupting, without rushing me. When I finished, she said something that stuck with me. "You don't have to solve your whole life right now," she said. "You just have to survive today." She helped me sign up for a few programs, showed me where to get food assistance, and told me about a community college nearby that offered affordable courses. "You're smart," she said, like it was a fact, not encouragement. "You just need a chance." No one had said that to me in a long time. The first job I landed was at a small bakery that opened before sunrise. The pay was barely enough, but it was something. I showed up every morning before the sky changed color, tying my apron with numb fingers, pretending I wasn't exhausted. The work was simple but relentless. By the end of each shift, my feet throbbed and my clothes smelled like sugar and yeast. Still, when I held my first paycheck in my hands, I felt something close to pride. Proof that I wasn't useless. Proof that I could stand on my own, even if I was shaking. To make ends meet, I picked up delivery work in the evenings. I biked through neighborhoods I'd never been to before, carrying food to doors that closed just as quickly as they opened. People took their bags without looking at me, without wondering where I was going when the shift ended. I didn't blame them. Everyone has their own life to worry about. But sometimes, as I pedaled back through the dark, I wished just one person would ask if I was okay. Money became a constant calculation. I turned grocery shopping into a challenge, scanning shelves for the cheapest options, doing math in my head. How many meals could I stretch out of $10? Which brand was slightly cheaper? Which item would last longer? I learned to ignore cravings and focus on fullness. Beans, rice, frozen vegetables, not exciting, but they kept me going. One night, standing in the shelter kitchen, I propped my phone against a stack of old cookbooks and recorded myself making dinner. It wasn't planned. I didn't think anyone would care. I just talked, quietly at first, about how to make food last when money doesn't. I posted the video and forgot about it, assuming it would disappear into the endless scroll of the internet like everything else. It didn't. The next morning there were comments, not many but enough to surprise me. People thanking me, people saying they were struggling too. Reading their words, I felt something loosen inside my chest. These strangers didn't know my story, didn't know my father, didn't know what I'd lost. They just knew I had shared something real and that it helped. I kept going. Not because I thought it would turn into anything big, but because it reminded me that I still mattered. Each video was a small act of defiance against the voice in my head that sounded too much like my father's. The voice that said I wasn't enough. Slowly, almost without noticing, I stopped checking my phone for his name. I stopped waiting for an apology that might never come. My days filled with work, classes, and late-night planning for a future that felt fragile but possible. I was still scared, still tired, still uncertain. But I was moving forward, one choice at a time. What I didn't know yet was that while I was learning how to survive, my father was rewriting my story without me. And the moment I discovered that lie would change everything. For a long time, I didn't look back. I told myself it was healthier that way. I focused on my routine instead. Wake up early, work the bakery shift, rush to class, deliver food at night, sleep just enough to do it all again. My life became a loop of exhaustion and determination, and in that loop, I survived. The shelter slowly started to feel less temporary, not because it was comfortable, but because I learned how to exist there. I learned which corners were quiet, which hours were safest, and how to disappear when I needed to. I learned how to smile when people asked polite questions and how to change the subject when they got too close. Most of all, I learned how to rely on myself. The videos became my secret escape. At first, I made them without thinking, just short clips showing how to stretch groceries, how to make something warm out of almost nothing. I filmed late at night when the kitchen was empty, whispering so I wouldn't wake anyone. I didn't show my face much. I didn't explain my story, I just shared what I knew, and people watched. Not millions. Not even thousands at first, but enough that I noticed. Enough that comments started showing up from the same names again and again. People asking questions. People saying, "Can you show more of this?" Or "This helped me today." Every time I read one, it felt like someone was tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, you're not invisible." If you're listening to this right now and you've ever felt like that too, like you don't matter, like no one sees how hard you're trying, then stay with me. And yeah, if stories like this mean something to you, subscribe. Because this isn't just my story, it's about survival, and a lot of us are quietly doing that every single day. Months passed. My life didn't suddenly become easier, but it became clearer. I was learning. I was building something, even if it was slow. I started to believe that maybe being kicked out wasn't the end of my life. Maybe it was the beginning of one I actually controlled. Then one afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I don't know what I was expecting when I typed my father's name into the search bar. Maybe nothing. Maybe proof that he missed me, maybe some sign that I still existed in his world. What I found instead made my stomach drop. Photos, smiles, a new house, a new partner, a life that looked polished and complete. It was like watching someone else's movie, and then I saw a comment under one of the pictures. Someone asked how I was doing. My father replied casually, almost proudly, "She left on her own, wanted freedom. Doesn't really keep in touch." I read that sentence again and again. In his version of the story, I wasn't kicked out. I wasn't pushed into the hallway with a bag and $30. I was just a rebellious kid who chose to walk away. That lie hurt more than the night he shut the door. Because it meant he didn't just abandon me, he rewrote me. I sat there staring at my phone, my hands shaking, all the nights at the shelter, all the times I skipped meals to save money, all the mornings I dragged myself out of bed when giving up would have been easier. And there he was, telling the world a clean, comfortable story where none of that existed. For days after that, I felt hollow. I went through the motions, but something inside me was cracked open. I stopped filming videos. I stopped replying to comments. The little light I'd built started to dim. At night, I lay awake thinking about how easy it had been for him to erase me. How easily people believed his version without ever asking mine. One morning, I showed up late to the bakery. My manager pulled me aside and told me gently but firmly that I needed to get it together or I'd lose the job. Hearing those words snapped me back to reality. I couldn't afford to fall apart. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have anyone waiting to catch me. That same day, I went to see Sarah. I told her everything. About the photos, about the lie, about how small and disposable it made me feel. She listened quietly, then said something that changed the way I saw myself. "You can't control the story people tell about you when you're not in the room," she said. "But you can control the story you tell about yourself." That sentence stayed with me. That night, instead of scrolling through my father's perfect life, I opened my phone and reread old comments on my videos. Messages from people who said my content helped them eat, helped them feel less alone. Those strangers didn't know my father's version of me, they only knew what I showed them, and maybe that was enough. I set my phone up again in the kitchen. My hands were shaking when I hit record. I talked about food, about money, about making it through hard weeks. But underneath it all, there was something new in my voice. Strength, not loud, not aggressive, just steady. If you're still listening right now, this is the moment where things start to change. So stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't. Because the next part of this story is where the truth finally starts catching up with the lie. I didn't know it yet, but by choosing to speak instead of staying silent, I was setting something in motion. And once it started, there was no way to stop it. After that night, something shifted inside me. I didn't suddenly feel brave or confident. I still woke up tired. I still worried about money. I still lived with the fear that one bad week could undo everything. But there was a quiet decision forming in me, one I didn't say out loud. I wasn't going to disappear anymore just because someone else found it convenient to forget me. I went back to posting regularly. Not every day, not perfectly, but consistently. I showed receipts. I showed cheap ingredients. I showed mistakes, burnt food, miscalculations. I talked about how exhausting it is to always be careful with money, how planning every meal can feel like a second full-time job. People responded to that honesty more than anything else. They didn't want perfection, they wanted real. The account started growing faster than I expected. Comments turned into conversations. Conversations turned into a small community. People shared their own stories in the replies, stories about being kicked out, cut off, ignored, or treated like a problem instead of a person. Late at night, after work, I would sit on my bed scrolling through those messages and feel something close to responsibility. Like if I stopped, I'd be leaving people halfway through something important. So if you're still listening right now and you've ever felt like life pushed you into a corner and walked away, stay with me. And yeah, subscribe. Because sometimes hearing someone else survive makes it easier to keep going yourself. A few months later, something unexpected happened. One of my older videos, a simple one where I showed how to make a full week of meals out of a single grocery bag, started getting shared. Slowly at first, then faster. I woke up one morning to hundreds of notifications. Messages I couldn't answer fast enough, people tagging friends, saying things like, "This is exactly what we need," or "This saved me this week." For the first time, I felt seen on a scale that scared me a little. With the growth came opportunities, small ones at first, a local store offering gift cards, a message from someone asking if I'd partner on a video. I read those emails 3 times, convinced they were mistakes, but they weren't. Someone wanted to pay me for something I'd learned just to survive. Around the same time, I finally saved enough to leave the shelter. The apartment wasn't much. A tiny studio in a rough area, a mattress on the floor. A table that wobbled if you leaned on it wrong. But it was mine. No one could take it away on a bad day. The first night there, I sat on the floor eating noodles out of a plastic bowl and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was safe. As my life slowly stabilized, curiosity crept back in. I told myself I wouldn't look, but I did. I checked my father's profile again. The pictures were still perfect. Vacations. Smiles, phrases about family and gratitude. But this time I noticed small cracks, comments that disappeared, people asking questions that didn't get answers, something felt off. Then one day, a message landed in my inbox from someone I didn't know. They said they had worked with my father years ago. They said they had seen my video shared in a group chat and recognized parts of the story. They apologized. They said they believed the version where I had chosen to leave and felt sick realizing the truth might be different. I didn't reply. More messages followed, not from him but from people around his life. Neighbors, old coworkers. Each one careful, unsure, but carrying the same theme. Confusion, doubt, realization. I hadn't named him. I hadn't accused him publicly. But the truth has a way of finding the cracks in a lie. That's when I understood something important. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to expose anyone directly. All I had done was tell my story honestly. And honesty was doing the rest on its own. If you're listening and wondering whether your truth matters, it does. Even when you whisper it. Especially then, so stick around. Subscribe, because the hardest part of this story isn't the pain. It's what happens when the people who hurt you finally realize you didn't break the way they expected you to. I didn't know what was coming next. I just knew I wasn't the same girl who sat at that bus stop anymore. And the door that had once been slammed in my face was about to open again, this time from the other side. I thought the attention would fade. Most things online do. People move on, trends change, and stories get buried under the next wave. But this didn't disappear. It grew quieter, heavier, like something settling instead of exploding. My videos kept reaching people not because they were dramatic, but because they were honest. And honesty has a strange way of sticking. I noticed it in small ways at first. A comment that asked a careful question. Someone saying, "This sounds familiar," without naming names. Another saying, "I think I know this story." I didn't respond to those. I never encouraged guessing. I never wanted a mob. All I wanted was to stop carrying the weight of silence alone. Life kept moving. I finished my classes. I picked up more work. I learned how to say no to things that drained me and yes to things that scared me in a good way. The platform became part of my routine, not my identity. It was a tool, a bridge, a reminder of where I came from and why I kept going. If you're still here listening, this is the part where a lot of people expect some dramatic revenge moment. A confrontation, a speech, but real life doesn't work like that. Most of the time, consequences arrive quietly. So stay with me, and if this story resonates with you, subscribe, because what happens next isn't loud, but it's real. One evening, after a long day, I checked my email and saw a name that made my chest tight. It wasn't my father. It was someone connected to him. A man I recognized from photos from that carefully curated life I'd seen online. His message was polite, careful. He said he'd seen one of my videos after someone sent it to him. He said parts of it felt uncomfortably familiar. Then he asked a simple question. "Is your father's first name the one I think it is?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to delete the email and pretend it didn't exist. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I'd built my life without one. But something inside me felt calm, not angry, not desperate, just steady. I replied with one word. "Yes." I didn't add details, I didn't attach proof, I didn't argue. I closed my laptop and went to sleep. I don't know exactly what happened on their end after that. I wasn't in the room when conversations happened. I wasn't there when timelines were compared or questions were asked. But about a week later, my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't seen in years. My father's number. The first message was short. "I'm sorry." The second came minutes later. "Please answer." Then more followed. Apologies mixed with panic. He said things were getting out of control, that people were asking questions, that he was being misunderstood, that he needed me to explain, to help clear things up, to fix it. I read every message slowly. I noticed how often the words "me" and "my reputation" appeared. I noticed how little he asked how I was. Even now, when the ground was shifting under his feet, I wasn't his daughter. I was damage control. My hands shook, but my mind felt clear. For a moment, I imagined answering. I imagined hearing his voice, older, uncertain. I imagined him finally admitting what he did. But then I remembered the bus stop, the shelter. The nights I went to sleep hungry, the lie he told so easily when someone asked about me. I turned off notifications for his number and set my phone down. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was solid, protective. Like a wall I had built brick by brick over years of survival. Over the next few weeks, I heard things through the edges of my life, pieces of conversations, people mentioning a breakup, a job lost, a story that no longer added up. I never confirmed anything. I never denied anything. I didn't need to. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let the truth speak without you. If you've ever been in a position where someone only values you when they need something, remember this moment. You are not obligated to save the people who refuse to save you. If that hits close to home, stay here. Subscribe. Because this story isn't about punishment, it's about choosing yourself when no one else did. I kept building my life. I expanded the content I made. I started talking not just about food, but about resources. About what to do when you're cut off. Where to go, how to ask for help without feeling ashamed. People trusted me with their stories, and I treated them carefully, knowing how fragile that trust is. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about my father, not with anger, with a strange distance. Like remembering a place you once lived but would never return to. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. And freedom, I learned, doesn't come from watching someone else fall. It comes from realizing you don't have to carry them anymore. The hardest part was over, or so I thought. Because the final chapter of this story wasn't about him at all. It was about me finally understanding what I'd survived and what I was capable of becoming. The noise around everything slowly faded, but the quiet that followed was different from the silence I used to fear. This one didn't feel empty. It felt earned. My days became calmer, not easier, but steadier. I had routines that belonged to me now, morning light through my own window, coffee made in my own kitchen, work that mattered because I chose it, not because I was trying to prove I deserved space in someone else's life. I finished my program. The day I held my certificate in my hands, I didn't think about my father at all. I thought about the girl who once sat at a bus stop counting $30 and wondering how long she could last. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her she was stronger than she felt, that she would survive, that she would build something real out of almost nothing. The platform grew into something I never expected. Not fame, not perfection, but connection. People trusted me with their stories. Messages came in from students, single parents, kids sleeping on couches, people who felt invisible in their own families. I read every message carefully. I replied when I could, and when I couldn't, I still carried their words with me. They reminded me why I started speaking in the first place. If you're still listening right now, if you've made it this far into my story, stay with me. Subscribe, not for me, but for yourself, because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that survival is possible, even when it feels unfair and lonely. I started using what I earned to give back in small ways. Gift cards, shared resources, lists of shelters and programs people could turn to when they had nowhere else. I partnered with the same kind of places that once helped me, the places people overlook until they need them. Every time I walked into one, I remembered that first night, the thin mattress, the locked door, the relief of not being pushed out again. Sometimes people asked if I ever planned to confront my father publicly, to expose him fully, to say his name. I always said no, not because he didn't deserve accountability, but because my healing didn't require his destruction. I didn't need to win against him. I needed to win for myself. I did hear updates, though. Bits and pieces carried by people who didn't know how close they were to the truth. His life didn't collapse overnight. It shrank. The way things do when they're built on lies. Fewer friends, fewer smiles, a quieter existence. And for the first time, I felt no urge to look closer. I had moved on. There were nights when his name still crossed my mind. Not with anger, not with hope, just curiosity. But I learned something important. Closure doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes it comes from distance. From living long enough without someone to realize you never needed their permission to exist. One evening, sitting alone after filming, I caught my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I looked older than I remembered being, not in a bad way, in a lived-in way, like someone who had been tested and didn't break. I smiled at that version of myself, the one who had carried so much quietly. I thought about all the people listening right now who might be standing at their own version of that door, the one that just closed, the one that made everything feel uncertain. If that's you, hear this clearly. Being pushed out does not mean you are unwanted by the world. It means the place you were in could not hold who you were becoming. Family isn't always the people who raise you. Sometimes it's the people who sit with you when you have nothing. Sometimes it's strangers who listen. Sometimes it's the version of yourself that refuses to give up, even when no one is watching. My father once told me to figure life out on my own. He meant it as rejection. He meant it as the end of something. He didn't realize he was handing me the beginning instead. I survived without him. Then I learned how to live. And now I help others do the same, not because I owe the world anything, but because I finally understand my worth. So if you're still here, still listening, still breathing through whatever you're facing, stay, subscribe, keep going. Because your story doesn't end where someone else gives up on you. Sometimes that's exactly where it starts.